We live in a time of global transformation. The Energy Futures podcast explores how we can accelerate the expansion of clean energy technologies and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. From heating and cooling our homes to moving around our planet and beyond, we bring together researchers, scientists, business leaders, and communicators to exchange knowledge and try to answer one important question. How can we create a sustainable energy future for all? This podcast is produced by Energy Futures Lab of Imperial College London.
In order to transform the UK's transport system into a fully electric one, government have to identify key areas of infrastructure that need support and investment. Do they run the risk of failure when large-scale decisions are not backed by analysis? Today's episode is hosted by Edoardo Taricco, a mechanical engineer and graduate of the Masters in Sustainable Energy Futures from Imperial. His guest is Matt Larsson, the founder of the Global Energy Transformation Institute. Matt has over 30 years' experience as a business and management consultant, developing strategies for companies in different industries. He has worked with large-scale transformation to electromobility and sustainability. His work has resulted in 5 internationally published books, starting from Global Energy Transformation and more recently, How Building the Future Really Works. In this episode, they discuss what is needed to develop the UK and the EU electromobility systems, societies and governments' thought process leading to unachievable targets, the need for identifying key risks and investing in infrastructure, and electromobility in developing countries.
Hello, welcome back to the Energy Futures podcast. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Mats Larsson. Mats, thanks so much for joining us. Mats is a systems thinker, author, and founder of the Global Energy Transformation Institute in Sweden, where he's based. Matt has done a lot of really interesting work around system change and also around electromobility. And he's just recently written a book called How Building the Future Really Works that I've read and very highly recommend. I'm sure we'll have the link to where you can find the book in the description of the episode. And in this episode, we're going to dig into electromobility and not just the technology, but really what it takes to transition transportation systems towards these electrified systems. And we're going to be talking about concepts that Matt discusses in his book. So thanks a lot again for joining us. And if you'd like to introduce yourself, what you do, why you think it's really interesting, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you, Eduardo. I've worked since 1990 as a business consultant with change management and business strategy development. I've since 2005, I've worked with large-scale change to electric vehicles, and I've written about 8-9 books, internationally published books about these changes, and I try to explain how these large-scale processes need to be driven in order for them to succeed.
Thank you very much. Could you tell us a little bit about the work that you do at the Global Energy Transformation Institute and what you do around electromobility as well?
Yes, we try to investigate the amount of resources and how that will be needed in order to change to electric vehicles on a large scale. Transportation systems are very large, and there are a huge amount of vehicles in each country, and in order to electrify all those vehicles, large amounts of electricity will be needed, and investments will be needed in other areas as well, like charging infrastructure, power generation, grid capacity, and digitization of grids, and not least competence development, training of individuals to be able to run and drive these changes. So we try to explore how these changes will need to be organized, managed, financed, and driven forward.
Very, very much looking forward to our discussion. There's a lot to talk about. I think a really interesting place to start would be discussing one of the themes that you talk about a lot in the book, which is this concept of hyperthink. Could you describe to our listeners what hyperthink is in your own words?
There is a concept called groupthink that's been investigated, researched for a long time now, and it was discovered, among other things, in the 1960s when the United States invaded Cuba through the Bay of Pigs, and it was a failure, that invasion, and the failure was said to be down to the failure of the administration to see the issue, to analyze the invasion from different perspectives. They all had the same, all the persons who were involved in the planning had the same perspective, the same background, and that type of thinking, when many persons who are involved in a particular decision think in the same way, have the same type of background, was named groupthink. And I reflected and I realized that groupthink may not be strong enough to describe what's going on at present in society. Many people in society think in the same way. We tend to take in the same news. We tend to collaborate in groups with our peers who think in the same way as us, and that creates a risk that decisions don't become analyzed enough from different perspectives. So I said that when these processes and these decisions are big enough to put the entire society at risk of, then we need another name for it. And I said hyperthink would be a good way of describing it, highlighting the importance and the risks involved of having a lot of people thinking in the same way and not seeing the possible pitfalls of mistaken decisions.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And why is it really a dangerous thing to fall into hyperthink in decision-making processes?
We can take the present change to sustainability and electric vehicles, for example, as examples of this. And the EU and the UK government have decided to ban the sales of new petrol and diesel cars from 2035. And the EU has also decided to rapidly phase out diesel trucks from 2030. And that has been done without analyzing the amount of electricity, the amount of grid capacity that will be needed, and the amount of investments in different areas that will be needed. And that has been, these decisions have been made without much debate, without much analysis, and we are now trying to make these analyses and see how much resources will be needed. Is it really realistic to go through these changes at the pace decided, and so on. That there are really big risks involved in making these large-scale decisions, because automotive companies, they will fire a lot of personnel who make diesel and petrol fueled vehicles, and utilities will need to expand certain areas of their business in order to reinforce grids, to increase their capacity to deliver power to all vehicles that will be electric. And a lot of other players in society will need to make big investments. They will need to start activities to support the change to electric vehicles, and without debate, without analysis, and so on, many of these things will not be undertaken, and it may even be so that organizations with different agendas may not even be interested or inclined to make some of these investments or start some of these activities without unless they become aware of them through debate, information, analysis of what needs to be done, and so on.
That's really interesting, and you put it really clearly. So correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, it's really the lack of structured debates that means that you miss out on a lot of the complex analysis that has to be done to really understand what it takes to change these really complex systems.
Yes, these decisions come from, of course, the very good ambition to make society sustainable, and that it is necessary to change transportation systems and to do these changes. But the perspective of sustainability is not the only one that needs to be taken. We need to analyze changes from the perspective of power supply, from the financial perspective of needing to invest a lot of money in different areas that so far have not been highlighted to a large extent in the debate, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up sustainability, but even, something that I'm sure most of our listeners would really relate to, and something that's very prevalent in the news right now is, the tariffs that the US has been applying to basically every country on the planet that derive from very simplistic calculations. To me, that's really something that's rooted in hyperthink, because it's almost as if they're just cutting through all the complexity and making it. I'm all for making things simple. I'm a big admirer of Steve Jobs, and one of my favorite quotes of his is "Simplicity is complexity resolved." But when you're dealing with such big systems, I completely agree that you need to have those structured debates to be able to uncover all the complexities. And I'd be really curious to know or hear about examples of countries or areas where hyperthink is being, I guess, done right, or examples where countries, whether it be even on a policy level, or companies that are really having those structured debates and being able to change large complex systems.
Yes, in many areas of the past, there has been much more preparation and much more analysis preceding large changes or large development initiatives. So I often use 3 American examples as examples, and where the big resources have been set aside to drive big changes or big development projects. And the first one of those is the change of American industry to war production, the production of military materials in the Second World War, which was a very large-scale change where basically the entire American industry was geared towards producing military equipment, everything from airplanes to uniforms and anything in between. And that was a really big change, and it was managed by an authority that was created in 1942 for that purpose. Another big program was the Marshall Plan after the war to help Europe recover industrially and financially and as a society, and that was also really successful, and it was driven by an authority. And the third one I often mention is the Apollo program, where NASA was given the task of organizing the effort of sending a man to the moon before the end of the decade, 1969. They were given the challenge in 1961, and they finished it in 1969. And that was a big development program involving a lot of different technology development initiatives, from rockets to moon landers and a launch pad for the rockets and a control center, etc. And all of these had to be developed for this development to become possible. And It's the same here with the change to electric vehicles. We have power generation, power grids. We have transmission grids, regional grids. We have local distribution grids. We have charging infrastructure. We have digitization of grids, and not least the training of individuals to take different roles in this change. So a lot of these, all these things need to be undertaken, they need to be financed, and they need to be managed in a structured and ordered way in order for all of these changes to become possible.
Those are really interesting examples that you bring up, and as I think about it now, the Marshall Program after the war and the moonshot mission, the similarities I see with the examples that you bring up is that those are really happening under very competitive environments where it was the US versus the Soviet Union on the race to get to the moon, and after the war, countries within Europe were competing with each other to be able to rebuild as quickly and as effectively as possible. With electromobility, do you think that well, actually, the first question is, how important is that aspect of competition in really being able to go about system change in a structured and effective way? And in electromobility, do you think that aspect of competition is missing?
Yes, I think it's important. In different ways, it's important that people with different backgrounds engage in discussion and try to find, highlight their aspects of change and development. And that hasn't really been the case in the case of electromobility and the change to a sustainable society overall. It has been approached, and it was started out from a sustainability perspective, and everyone has got along, and automotive companies have said, yes, we can do the change. Utilities have said, yes, we can supply the electricity. Everyone else has clapped and joined in. But these things have not really been investigated and analyzed, and very few people have looked at how much resources will be needed. And now actually, for example, utilities are starting to, in Sweden, are starting to find that there will probably be a big need for investment in power distribution and local grids in order for this to become possible, because there are bottlenecks in power systems and power grids, and they're not dimensioned to charge, for example, hundreds of lorries at in 1 hour in parallel at logistics centers, or where we've studied, for example, a logistics center in Helsingborg together with the utility there, Öresundskraft. And we found that, yes, for the few coming years, it will not be a problem to charge lorries and to increase subscriptions. But at some point in the relatively near future, it's very likely that the capacity will run out, and investments will need to be made in substations and in the different parts of substations and so on. And these investments take years usually, and they will have to be done in many places to support the power supply to logistics centers, to ports where a lot of transportation is direct to residential areas, other places where a lot of and along motorways and highways where a lot of vehicles will have to be charged that travel long distances.
So and yeah, that's really interesting. And as I hear you speak about all the different moving parts and all the ways that we need to invest in this really critical infrastructure, I think about I think it's fair to say that China is a country that's really done it right in terms of the electrification of their transport systems, and they have, if I get my facts right, in the early 2000s, they really started to identify transport as, or the electrification of transport as a strategic industry to invest in, perhaps for different reasons as the ones that drive the system change here in Europe. We're more focused on the environmental aspect, whereas they knew that they couldn't compete with the German automakers, so perhaps they're more driven by the economic and the social aspect. But what do you think we can really learn from the way that China has strategically invested in their infrastructure and gone about this large-scale system change?
Well, there are things I think we can learn from it, but China as a economy that's basically driven by the government, they have a different situation, and they control the resources there in a way that we don't do in Europe and in the United States. So, but I still think that many of these things develop through lucky or unlucky circumstances. And the lucky circumstance for China is that they were in a development, in a phase of development where they realized, and they didn't have this sustainability perspective, where in our society, sustainability has been discussed as something that needs to be done regardless of how much resources will be needed and regardless of the investments that will be needed. They simply had an understanding, I believe, that they would have to build new power generation for many purposes, and they had to invest in their infrastructure in different ways for different purposes. Whereas we had the somewhat unlucky circumstance that our debate started out with the need to change sustainable society, and that many people in our society overlooked the need to analyze this or look at this from other perspectives. So I think basically the Chinese were in a mode of thinking where they saw we need to do this, like JFK in the US and NASA when they did the Apollo program. We need to do this. We don't have the rockets. We don't have the launch pad. We don't have the control center. We need to build those. And China in the same way said we don't have enough power. We need the charging infrastructure. We need to look at a lot of different things. Whereas we people in Europe and the United States happen to start out with the idea that sustainability we need to change to a sustainable society, and we need to do this regardless of the resources, regardless of the cost, regardless of the investment needed. And that was I don't think there is no big way to manage these overall processes. They just happen in society, and people take different roles and so on. And one country happens to be in the right position, thinking, considering the different aspects, whereas other countries or parts of the world don't. And that's simply I think it's a difficult process to manage and to get right, because when everyone is focused on sustainability, they think that people who bring up other aspects are simply complicating things and trying to stop it, whereas we see now that it's important to analyze the change from a number of different perspectives, and we can't do it unless we make investments and change initiatives in a large number of areas.
to what extent and by how much do you think that in general countries in Europe, and maybe you can talk about Sweden, to what extent do you think that we are underestimating the amount of new electricity supply that we need to install in order to achieve, say, maybe not 100%, but large-scale change in electromobility?
I think we are underestimating it very much. And the need to expand power generation and invest in reinforcements of power grids will differ in different countries. But for example, in order to drive all the vehicles in the UK on electricity, about 30% is the amount needed to run the car fleets on electricity in the UK. 32 million cars. And then another something like 20% will be needed for transportation fleets. So we arrive at about 50% of the present amount of power generated in the UK will be needed to run electric vehicle fleets when all vehicles become electric. So and I don't know what the estimates have been that have underpinned the decisions by the UK government to do this, to do the change, or to decide that to ban the sales of new petrol and diesel cars from 2035. But I'm sure that they have underestimated the need for electricity, and that they also have underestimated the need to invest in power grids and transmission grids in overall. And also they are likely to have underestimated the need to train people to take the different roles necessary in the change.
Do you think that there is actually damage being done, or not damage being done, but do you think that it's counterproductive to have these short-term or relatively short-term targets, such as the one to ban the sale of internal combustion engines, that are so unachievable almost? Do you think that it almost creates a situation where the market signal is so weak that people don't know how to invest and the markets don't know how to react? Do you think that that these short-term targets actually do more bad than good, or not?
Yes, I think the short-term targets are harmful in many ways, and because they make people blind to aspects that have not been considered in the planning of these changes. So making a short-term target for the change to electric vehicles and forcing automotive companies to increase the sales of electric cars, electric lorries at a pace that's not realistic actually to achieve, without also highlighting the other changes that will be needed in order to achieve this, will make governments take unrealistic decisions. It will make people optimistic and hopeful that we're actually on the way to solve these things. And overall, we run the risk as a society of creating impossible change goals for many types of companies, and we don't create any change goals for other types of companies. Like we create change goals for automotive companies, but we don't create any plans or any framework for change for utilities or for power generation, or for the training of individuals to actually take on the different roles that will be needed in these change programs.
I'm really interested to talk about how we get to the point where these targets are, become commonplace. Why? And we talked about hyperthink earlier, but why really? What's at the root of hyperthink, and why do we end up in situations where we have these targets that are so unachievable? Is it in the way? Is it inherent in the way that politics work, where a politician wants to be in power, and perhaps there is no, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there isn't so much value in mapping out all the complexity before even being in power? Or is it in the way that we use decision-making tools to deal with uncertainty and complexity? So what's really at the root of this problem of hyperthink and setting these targets that we can't meet?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. I think as humans, we are inclined to think that we are right in our thoughts, and we're inclined to those ideas, and that type of feeling is often reinforced by our friends and by our colleagues and peers, and we are not always open to debate and to controversial ideas as we should have been. And we've in the West and in other parts of the world, we've experienced a period now of openness from the Second World War, of cohesion, where countries and individuals have had the inclination to work together and to because we've seen that it pays off. We get economic growth, we get prosperity, and we've seen that this is actually a good way to run society. But we've also seen that these developments provide smaller returns as we go along, and by doing more of the same thing, we get less and less in return, which is a normal process. But people get impatient, and they think there must be a better way to do this than in this democratic, difficult way of running things and letting everyone into the debate and so on. We should probably be better off if we closed our borders, reduced our involvement with other nations, so in that in this effort to increase growth and to improve things for in a number of ways, there is also an inclination, I think, for people to say, we have the right ideas, our group is probably right, and we don't need to get too much involved with people with other ways of seeing things. So I think, unfortunately, we have gone past an era of increasing collaboration and increasing growth from these initiatives, and then we've seen it doesn't pay off in the way it used to do, and politicians and others are looking for ways to get back on the growth path and to actually achieve their goals in other ways than through collaboration and the ways we've done over the past decades.
Are there any institutions that are really trying to fix this problem of collaboration between different countries and governments or even companies? Are there any, whether it's institutions or organizations that are really trying to bring people together to have the right sorts of discussions?
Yes, definitely. We have many institutions that have these goals, but unfortunately, I don't think we have the institutions that help organize. I mean, the institutions we have been successful, like the UN, the EU, have been successful in creating the society we have now. But we probably need other types of institutions, other types of initiatives now to help solve the issues of development to sustainable society, the change to electromobility and so on, because these are what we have done has been complex in a way, but this is complexity in different areas. It's about complex power generation systems, power distribution systems, complexity in creating the change from petrol and diesel fueled vehicles to electric, and creating this huge this new huge change in terms of jobs and competencies that will be needed. We don't need as much knowledge in mechanical engineering anymore if we don't want to produce as much petrol and diesel cars. We need larger amounts of electric competence. We need electric competence in automotive companies. We need electric competence in political organizations. We need electrical competence in many places in society, in municipalities even, and in regional organizations, in national authorities, and so on, where we have all grown up and we've learned a lot about oil and petrol and diesel and diesel cars and mechanical things, but we have very little insight into the power infrastructure works and what are the limits and the bottlenecks and etc. So we need both on an international level, we need people with insight that this is not a simple change, it's a very complex change. And we need this insight also in national authorities, regional authorities, local authorities, in automotive companies, in utilities, and in all the other organizations that will need to participate in this change. And I've actually heard managers in automotive companies say that the automotive industry can handle this change. We only need some overall decisions made by governments, but then automotive industry can handle the change. I heard this in about 2008, 2009 for the first time from a manager, and then I heard the same from the same person who I met by chance in a digital meeting, saying the same thing in 2024, last year. And in reality, it's not true. The automotive industry can only handle a small part of the change, and that's the vehicle aspects. But utilities and a lot of other companies and public organizations, etc., will need to do a lot of different other things in order to make this change happen.
Are there specific policies or ways in which the government can intervene to be able to bring the right stakeholders and involve them into the process and form markets such that you have all the key players, I guess, acting in the ways that really change the system? What are the best kind of mechanisms that the government can use to go about that?
Well, it's difficult because there are forces that go against this change, of course. I mean, all of us would like a situation where we could move forward doing more of the same. Everyone doing a little bit different, but overall, we'd like to do more of the same, and I'd like to continue doing what I do, and most other people would like to continue doing what they do as well. But others need to change. And this is probably one of the challenges here, that it's not a matter of getting others to change, it's a matter of getting ourselves to change. And we need to change in a big way, but we don't know exactly in what way. Because we know that, and it's not only one particular type of company, one particular type of industry that needs to change or drive the change and make it possible. We need to logistics companies can't run logistics systems in the way they do at present if they have electric vehicles instead. They think that if we only buy electric trucks, we could simply charge them at a very, very high speed and we could continue to have the availability of vehicles in the same way. We could just make 5-10 minute charging breaks, and we could still utilize drivers and vehicles in the same way we do now. But it will be very difficult. It will actually require extreme investment in power grids, for example, at all levels, if we should make it possible to charge electric vehicles at 1 megawatt or 2 megawatts, which actually the transportation industry envisions will be possible. But if they have to pay for that, it would probably be a very high amount that they'd need to pay for every charging, because the investment to make it possible to charge hundreds of vehicles at this very high capacity will be immense, and it's not realistic. So automotive companies will need to learn, and transportation companies will need to learn from utilities. What are the bottlenecks in power grids? What are the bottlenecks in power generation? How much can we actually expand, and how much will it cost? And utilities will need to learn from logistics companies and transportation companies and automotive companies what they would need, and they will need to discuss and find a way to settle their differences in different ways and come up with a solution or they will have to come up with solutions to a multitude of problems and issues that they haven't even started to address, or have barely started to address.
And do you think that over time there's any way that these dynamics are going to change as perhaps the threat of climate change becomes more imminent, or perhaps the cost of owning an internal combustion engine increases with oil prices? How do you think these dynamics are going to be affected by external factors such as these?
There are several external factors, I believe, that can change this dynamic. One of them is if the automotive companies don't manage to sell enough electric vehicles to fulfill the goals of the EU, and they may be facing, or it's maybe likely that they will be facing very large fines, and the EU will have to consider, can we actually ask them to pay these fines, or have we in some way overestimated the pace at this at which the change can proceed? So that's one possibility, and that there is also the possibility that utilities will find that, or transportation companies will find that they can't get enough power or not enough grid capacity to charge their vehicles at all times, and that they can't buy more than a fraction of, or convert more than a fraction of their fleets to electric vehicles, because they can't increase their subscriptions, and they can't pay off the higher cost of purchasing these electric lorries, etc. And there's also the risk that we will encounter the phenomenon that's known as peak oil, which is the peak in oil production, which was a theme that was discussed in the early 21st century when a number of books were published about peak oil, saying that the global oil production will reach its peak, and after the peak it will go into decline, and decline will be very problematic for countries and for companies, because we will not get enough oil in order to fuel transportation or provide the plastics industry with raw materials, etc. So when that happens, and there are signals saying that it's likely to happen over the next few years. We've had this increase in fracking and the production of unconventional oil, which has increased the oil supply somewhat over the past decade. But there are signals that this increase will come to an end, and that we will instead experience a situation where oil production will go into decline. The production of the UK, of Norway, and many other countries has already been declining for a number of years, and the UK and Norway have reduced their oil production by 50%. So it's not unreasonable to think, and there are analyses that have been published that say that this increase in the amount of fracking oil that's supplied will stop, and that we will experience this peak oil event, and that we will after that experience both decreasing amounts of oil being supplied, and that we will experience a rapid increase in oil prices. We don't see that at present. We are having very low oil prices, as we all know, and Saudi Arabia is increasing their production. But some analysts, and in particular those who analyze the long-term opportunity for petroleum production, say that this is not going to continue for very long, and that more countries like the UK and Norway are going to face the situation where their oil production volumes is going into decline. So there are many ways in which this mindset may change, and it is likely that many people will come to insights that will force us to reevaluate our visions of how the future may be created.
What is your view around the shift to electromobility in developing countries? Because, I'm thinking, and I'm not so informed as to what their targets are, but if I'm thinking, it's going to be so hard for countries like Sweden and the UK to get it right. And these are already countries that have, relatively pretty well-built grids that, supply a lot of power per capita. What's your view around this same sort of system change in developing countries where the same sort of grid infrastructure is different, and there is, different levels of power production per capita, perhaps it's much lower. What is your view around that?
Yes, that is an interesting question. I think we have different levels of power generation and power supply and power grid capacity in different countries, and we need to realize that. And that is an important aspect of the insight that we are going to make over the coming years, that even in the EU, we have different situations, and we are running a project in this across the South Baltic, where we have partners from Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Poland, and Lithuania, and we realize that the situation is very different in these countries, and that countries in Eastern Europe are facing different situations. They're not developing countries in the sense, in the formal sense, but their power grids and the power generation capacity is not in all areas developed to the extent that it is in many Western European countries. And in Southern Europe, as we know, in Spain, for example, they've experienced problems with having the large part of their power grid breaking down in the past week. And these events are likely to continue. We have Sweden, Norway, Finland, that have almost twice twice to three times the amount of power generated per capita as Germany, the UK, Italy, and so on. But then we also have the developing countries, and I haven't been able to do much analysis of their situation, but I think this assumption in Europe by the EU and also by most many other organizations, like perhaps the UN or the World Bank or whatever, is that the development in the countries that are at the front end of this development will then drive and spill over to the countries that are are facing more challenges, like Eastern Europe, some parts of Southern Europe, developing countries in Africa, for example. And I don't think more attention has been paid to that matter than that simple thought that has always been the case. The countries at the front have driven the development, and it has spilled over to other countries. But this is very different situation, and we are setting very hard deadlines for the development, which means that we can't just assume that the development is going to proceed in a certain way. We need to make sure that it will, and it will have to be ensured for the countries at the front of the development, because we don't have everything in place to facilitate the change. We don't have, all countries do not have access to enough electricity to fuel all their vehicles. And actually, almost no country has. We don't have access to the power grids necessary to distribute the electricity that would be needed to points in our countries where a large amount of charging will have to be made, etc. And we don't know how to solve these things. We don't have a plan for solving these things in our countries at the front of this development. And I believe as I speak to our project colleagues in Poland and Lithuania in our project South Baltic Digital Electromobility Enabling Services, I'm sure, I feel that they are at an earlier stage in their thoughts, and that people around them are at an earlier stage in their thoughts regarding the planning of these changes than we are. And I assume that people in Africa and politicians in Africa have not perhaps even started to consider how much electricity will be needed, and how cars and trucks and buses are going to be charged in Nairobi or Mombasa or wherever we're talking about. It's let alone in the more rural areas of Africa. So I have no answer to how this can be solved, but I don't think that there are any other people in the world who have either.
Yeah, and you raise a really interesting point around it being very important for the first movers to get it right, so there's spillover. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about just before we wrap up, that's something that you talk about in your book as well, is the need to focus on the right solutions, and more specifically, focus funding and even human capital to scale the solutions that we really want to bet on in a targeted way. So within the field of electromobility, what do you think are the real things that we should focus on? I know infrastructure is obviously a massive component, but on the other side of that, are there some areas of innovation that we should not be pursuing so actively?
I think the danger we're running at present is the danger that we have too many ideas that we develop or technologies, system solutions that we develop in parallel without deciding which ones to go for. And when we're talking technology development and the development of infrastructure systems, these developments take not 10 years, they take 20 years or 25, 30 years. We saw the start of digitization after the Second World War, or actually during the Second World War, as the computers started to become developed. And we now have computers in our pockets. And we've seen that this development has made progress over 80 years. There's never been a deadline for this, or someone saying we need to have smartphones by, and 1 billion people need to have smartphones by this date and so. And as we develop drive this change towards very strict deadlines, we need to make sure that we have some plans in place and that we pursue these plans in a structured way in order for it to become possible to actually succeed with the change. And we can't have too many different options, alternatives. We can do that in the computer industry where we don't have any plans or strict deadlines. But if we say that we will ban the sales of new petrol and diesel cars from 2035, and we will rapidly phase out diesel trucks from 2030, and actually it needs to start now in order to build the momentum of this change. If we say that, we need to make sure that in 2035, in 2040, in 2045, there will be infrastructure to support the number of vehicles that will have to be charged, that we have the competence available. And that to do that, there is a need for a program similar to the Apollo program. Not exactly the same, but adapted from the Apollo program based on the circumstances we are facing now with this change. And in order to do this, we actually need to reduce the amount of technologies and solutions that we are looking at. It's not possible, I believe, and we need to verify this, of course, through calculations and plans and so on, which need to be started by a larger number of researchers and experts that are involved in this right now. But we need to cut down the number of alternatives and say what different charging technologies will be needed, how much of each type of charger will be needed, like stationary chargers. Do we need other forms of charging? Like it was mentioned this morning when I held a presentation by one of the participants there, that battery switching systems may be needed. Or as many believe in that electric road systems will be needed, where there are tracks in road surfaces so that vehicles can be charged on the go while they are driving. And if we want to have, or if we need to have electric road systems, or also battery switching systems or other large-scale infrastructure developments, we need to start them now in order for them to develop to both in terms of cost and in terms of user friendliness, to a level where they become competitive and cost effective in 15 or 20 years, and where they can deliver the amount of electricity or services to drivers within that framework. So we need to plan and draw up the systems that we need at this point in order to build them and in order to drive the development forward. And in order to do that, we need people who are competent in these different disciplines. Like I often talk about electrification strategists as being a type of competence that will be needed in large numbers. People with the ability to make strategies for the electrification. I also speak a lot about electrification architects with a more technical competence that can draw up the actual maps of the future systems and plan their development in local settings, in regions, on the national scale, or even internationally. How can these different systems work in Europe, across Europe, and how can we drive the change forward in a number of countries with different situations at the same time? So there will be a need for electrification strategists, electrification architects, and an expansion of the competence and of the organizations that are needed to support this change.
It's a bit like the chicken and egg problem. What comes first, the electric car or the charger? It's
yes.
But you pick up on a very interesting trade-off between investing resources in more proven technologies that we know we fundamentally need, and investing in those that are less market ready, less commercial, but could potentially be very disruptive. I think one final question I wanted to ask before we wrap up is I wanted to ask you what, in your opinion, gives you hope when you look at the electrification of transport, maybe in your own country or elsewhere. But what is really giving you hope in this field?
Well, what's giving me hope is that we have, as a society, we have managed these types of projects before, and we can learn to manage them again. But we need to get our acts together and mobilize the resources that will be necessary. And we need to build the resources that will be necessary. But we have done that before. The Americans showed us that they could build NASA, and NASA could succeed with putting a man on the moon before the end of the decade. And we've seen similar endeavors and successful outcomes of these types of projects before. And I believe that is the hope that we need to have, that we can once more get our act together and do what's needed in order to make this change happen.
That's amazing. I want to thank you so much again for joining us. And for our listeners, Mats' book, How Building the Future Really Works, can be found in the description of this episode. I really, really enjoyed our conversation, and thanks so much for finding the time.
Thank you very much, Eduardo.
Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to the Energy Futures podcast. Here at Energy Futures Lab, we are dedicated to addressing global energy challenges through pioneering research, innovation, and advocacy. To learn more about us and the exciting projects we are working on, visit our website and follow us on social media. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and share and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest content. Until next time, stay curious.